Alright, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings Here. Well, here. Here where I be. So thinking, and then saying, well, where do I start with? Okay. The idea of when are you allowed to be confident in what you think? And especially if what you think is going to project, change the future, that's your entire purpose. Or should you not think and just let the future happen when things that are causing the future to happen are, chaotic and don't think? And that seems like a pretty easy answer. If there's a choice between a thinking process, attempting to create a future, and a non-thinking process, it seems you should vote for the thinking process, universally. It seems it's like, again, the argument is, if you're in a crashing plane, you want somebody, and the pilot's dead, and you need, whoever's the best at flying planes ought to be flying the plane, right? Whoever spent the most time, in the simulator, however you want to describe it. You want some level of competence, not just give it to chaos or stupid or, something in that category. I guess then the second question would be is how can you know you're not crazy? And it seems you would know you're not crazy when, most of the time, you're able to eat your dinner without sticking a fork in your eye. Well, that's good. That's a good test. And so you just do a bunch of those kind of tests regarding the reliability. Do you drive your car off a cliff? No, I didn't do that. There's lots of little tests you pass, and you say, okay, I'm not crazy. And it doesn't seem that complicated to say, okay, you could probably tell when there's a unreliability in your beliefs, so there's a lot of people that, through the time being online, you realize who really aren't consolidating or are they're not really building their understanding in incremental pieces. They're just accepting a package. So whether it's the Scientologists or whether it's the Christians or some other thing, and they just give them the whole package, and they don't have to do any of the processing of figuring out whether everything they believe is actually the truth or whether they actually want to be a member of that club. They really don't shake the members' hands and figure out whether these are people they want to hang out with. Instead, they just accept a package, and then they hop from bandwagon to bandwagon throughout their life, because they're really not, I don't even know how to, because they really haven't constructed their own little house, and they don't know how it really works. They're just renting somebody else's, somebody else constructed something, and they're just moving into it. So they really don't know how to fix it or maintain it or keep it, because they didn't build it. So I guess I'd say that's part of it. It's part of why there's people who just jump, is because of that idea that they really don't know their own beliefs. They really haven't spent enough time being an introvert and analyzing themselves, I guess. Because obviously I would argue, I don't migrate in terms of my opinions much. Or at all. And it's because I know them too well. I've already tested them well, and I know what they are. And so no one's going to tell me a rock is a butterfly or something like that. I know rocks are rocks. I know butterflies are butterflies, and I know the difference. All right, I guess that's one way of saying it. All right, so anyway, I did another version of the Benatar arguments, and related to just asking these questions of how do we analyze our position here on planet Earth and what our what's reasonable to think and what's reasonable to act on in terms of being an advocate, or being, if you ever were in the position of having the power, what you should do with it. you know. So it's all interesting in terms of my agenda, which is just to point out, kind of these simple arguments about our position. And our position is where we just happen to be created by a really shitty creator, evolution. And it makes monsters, generally speaking. And generally speaking, without our culture and our education and our maturation in the context of knowledge, in the context of knowing what harm is, and knowing that you aren't different than the other animated objects, and they aren't just things, that they are, like the first line says, it's not a single player game, that everything you're interacting with is either somebody else's disease or somebody else's food or somebody else's something, and that there's implications to everything you do. And you have to be careful that you don't do anything deliberately or willfully anyway to jeopardize somebody else's welfare to your benefit. And so these are little ethical ideas that we can acquire because of civilization and acquiring knowledge. And none of the other animated objects on Earth have faculties to do that in any way compares to the weight and density of our knowledge that we're able to put into a brain and swing the numbers. They're doing 2 + 2, and we're doing, quadratic equations and all that kind of stuff. So that points to our responsibility here as the smartest thing on Earth, the most capable of fixing things and correcting the injustices and the bads. Okay, yeah, there's lots of them. But then it gets into a conversation about the fact that people just say, well, there's nothing I can do about that, and so therefore that's acceptable. So the fact that nature creates a circumstance where there's all kinds of attrition, that everybody has to be killed, and that they are often killed just in such an ugly and sloppy and wasteful manner, and the least we could do is put them to sleep first, or inject them with morphine, or do something to make their passage from being alive to dead more pleasant. Seems a minimum kind of passion we would have in terms of doing something about the fact that the war is happening in our yard, so to speak. I mean, you have all these injured and broken war victims sitting there in your back porch, and the fact is, that you do have a bunch of morphine in the cabinet, and you do have some ability to do something about it, so you should be doing something about it. It should be a distracting and rather urgent event. You just don't go about your life, turn on your little, cartoons on TV and eat your potato chips. It should be a distracting reality. And I guess that's sort of what I'm trying to point out, is that clearly it's always been a distracting reality to me. That context of my existence has bothered me every day of my life. I don't think there's a single day I didn't spend some time contemplating what's happening to either animals or people while I was eating potato chips. And it would occur to me that, oh, yeah, I'm having a good day, but there's a lot of people not having a good day. Or if I was having a bad day, I would recognize there's lots of other people having a bad day. I'm just saying it's never far from being in my thought stream, or certainly in my dreams. I have to say my dreams are plagued by these thought experiments. The trolley. It's never the trolley one, but I mean, there's always something in the dream where there's this, problem to be fixed, and it's I only have, I have half the tools to fix it. You have to fly somewhere, and I only got one wing. Some sort of crap like that. So anyway, so yeah, it's sort of an important agenda to help people realize that their life isn't their own, and the stakes are substantial in the sense that right now there's people experiencing things that are just you can't imagine, and they're so abhorrent in terms of you wouldn't want it to happen to you, and you wouldn't want to live if it did happen to you, and you know it. There's just no way you'd make the bargain, and that's really the simple realization that points out that, well, then how can you keep pressing the go button? Yes, give it more electricity. Keep the plug plugged in. Vote for it. Plug. Keep do more. How can you keep pressing that lever when you know the guy next to you, every time you do that, you're sending the 50 volts through him. All of this negative, wasted suffering is frankly going to be endured, and it's going to be endured by a sentient brain, and you're only escaping a very superficial, you're only superficially escaping the reality that you are being the victim also. The perpetrator is the victim. It's, there's no distinction. It's a brain suffering, and you can pretend it somehow matters which one it is, but that's pretending. So I guess that's one of those key things to understand, is just to be aware of the fact that it's not this narrow thing that, well, what happens to me is the only thing that happens, and that's not how the universe works. And so all of it is a kind of you. It's just as real as you, and so you're not escaping. That's essentially your kid. It could be your thing that you think is part of your world. And it's if you wouldn't subject it to your kid, if you wouldn't allow it to happen to your kid, why are you allowing it to happen to somebody else's? Because it's goddamn the same thing. So these aren't very challenging, things to be arguing or saying. But apparently, okay, I mean, I think they're not very challenging, but it's very challenging to get people to even do the 2 + 2 thing. Calculations that I thought were way past modern man having any problem with, all of a sudden have become difficult, it would appear. And all of a sudden, and I just mean over the last 30 years, I've just seen devolution. This, the conversations aren't getting smarter; they're getting dumber and dumber, and the people are just, 80% trolls. I mean, there's so few people that can take anything seriously and say anything that can be taken seriously. So it's all very depressing. Anyway, so that's some sort of, the pre-video, and so I don't know. So I did a bit of that in this video, where I pre-videoed the video. Anyway, did a video before I did the video. But anyway, so we'll play some of that. Because I don't exactly remember what my theme was, but I'm usually interesting. Anyway, so this Carnism Debunked is the channel. Alright, so yes, I would point out he did a reasonably good job of his interviewing and tried to save Benatar from himself, but he couldn't do it. And so Benatar, drowned in his own word gibberish in a society. And then that society mechanism, that thing of billions of little life forms,
You know,
Well, that was pretty good, actually. So I was just going through the stages here, where you start with a nuclear bits, then you get an atom, then you get a compound, a piece of chemistry, and then the chemistry, turns into a single-celled organism, maybe, and then the weird step, where the little single cells end up being organized, obliged to be enslaved to some bigger organism and now the cells can transfer information, with electricity and do this, and it creates this neural net, and that creates this consciousness. And it's just so funny how, it's just one of those weird facts that there's no point in talking about what life on Earth is, because there's two distinctly different things on Earth. There's the living cells, and the thinking machines are made out of enslaving them to some sort of purpose. There's not a living thing that's thinking. It's a colony of living things that's creating a thinking machine through the enslavement of the DNA molecule. So that's the unique feature of the DNA molecule, is that it can not only make a little single cell that can have function, a machine, but then it can take all those machines and make another bigger machine. And that is really interesting. And it just proves how distinct or different, or how displaced we are from any kind of purpose. If you're going to have a God make living things, why that 2 steps? Why take that extra step and make it out of a bunch of enslaved cells, when you could theoretically just make it out of the chemistry?
We can react with all kinds of these little emotional things.
All right, so then the senses and the whole brain, the whole homunculus that everybody really is, this little weird sensation that you are forced, you're in a chair and you're forced to watch the movie and you're forced to react to it. And there's no escaping the theater, so to speak. There's no escaping your chair, and there's no knowing what comes next. I mean, there's something bizarre can happen on the screen. I mean, a plane can crash, or all of a sudden you can have a hemorrhage in your brain, and your comfort can collapse. But you're just sitting here stuck, having to be a victim to whatever's happening on the field, and you really aren't a player. You're just a watcher. You're just watching yourself, your brain react, and you're watching other people react and do their stupid, silly shit. And in a lot of ways, this, you're so distant from anything called control.
More internal and immediate. So anyway,
so I guess I was talking about Benatar doesn't really have a horse in this race. Is one of his kids isn't running, so he doesn't care if it sucks, that kind of, whatever. So he just doesn't, he just isn't connecting it to any kind of rational urgency in terms of recognizing there's a real problem here that really needs to be fixed, and it's not some sort of academic problem. It's an hystemic, hard, really nasty. It's really too expensive. It's not just a little bit too expensive. It's really too expensive.
No, I didn't get to finish. I was plowing a new road for my Tonka truck, and I was doing.
Okay, so I was talking about being a kid, and the fact that it occurred to me as a kid that from the Lord's Prayer, I think that's what it's called. If I die before I wake, and I remember I would be semi-obligated to do this little ritual before bed. It wasn't for a very long period of my life, maybe a couple of years. Probably less than that, because I wasn't very obedient to that kind of crap. I just, and it certainly, I had nothing in me inspired me to say, oh, what a fun ritual, so I didn't really have much to do with it. And I didn't like memorizing anything either. But anyway, I just do remember the words, if I die before I wake. And first that scared me. Why do I have to talk about dying before I wake? That doesn't seem like a good thing. Why are you doing that to me? But then it did occur to me, what would actually be the consequence of dying before I wake? Well, that's great, right? Because then I don't have to face tomorrow. I don't have to go to school. Or whatever the bullshit I had to do. Because that was probably before school, frankly. But anyway, so yeah, I they're indoctrinating me into this ritual of playing with God and it had exactly the opposite effect on me, and it just gave me it just built my cynicism and my recognition that, you know what, I really shouldn't have to do this, right? I shouldn't have to play. I mean, why should I mean, go ahead, find somebody else to take my place, because I really don't want to do this shit. Okay, you get polio, and you do this iron lung stuff, and you do all that crap. I don't want to have anything to do with this shit. And so that did occur to me as I pondered my existence at 5 years old, or 4.
For ice cream or something, it's this sticky shit, and then they give you this.
Yeah, so lots about life that I really did have a very low tolerance level. So I hated sticky things. I just couldn't stand sticky shit. And then, their solution was a plastic fork to eat your food. And you're like, what the fuck is this stupid thing? It's a spork. Fuck you. We have a civilization. I don't have to use this. I was just so... I was just... It was just, yeah. I mean, it was just kind of obvious that whatever tiny bit of instinct I had as a wild animal, it just didn't have any appreciation for any of these silly parts of civilization. They weren't fixing anything that mattered. They were just doing these silly song and dance stuff. It was all this pantomime, and I was just totally interested in that play.
I mean, they'd be a lot alike. And then if you made 1,000 categories or 10,000 categories, you could just understand that you'd start ending up with, 1 million people.
So the simple truth is that, I was trying to get to the point of this first statement, not a single player game, and really it's you're playing all the roles. And, and it's not reincarnation, but just the fact is there's going to be human beings in the future, and they're going to, they might not look like you, and if they don't look like you, they'll talk like you. If they look like you, then they won't talk. But it doesn't matter. There's going to be all kinds of consciousnesses existing that are going to be essentially stuck in the same kind of disposition or mood or attitude that you're stuck in. And so it's the same difference. I mean, there's the little tiny differences don't matter. And so you could just basically slide people into those categories. And what do you need? 1,000 categories? It'd be very interesting to see, right? I mean, if we could just make 1,000 buckets, and then we just start putting all the people in the bucket, their pigeonhole, and just see how much variance there is once you put them in the buckets. It'd be to me it'd be interesting to see what the 1,000 buckets look like versus 10,000 buckets, versus 100,000 buckets. So at 100,000 you'd have like 70 people in every bucket. I don't know how many. At 100,000 that'd be 7 billion. Yeah, so it's like 70 people in each bucket. So that's probably, it'd be just interesting to see how much they seem identical. Yeah, how close to twin-like they are. But anyway. But again, what really matters isn't superficial similarities. Obviously the brain similarities are the ones I'm talking about.
Passion to sit there and raise little ones to learn how to watch the carnage and have fun. I mean, that's what you're doing, right? You're having kids so you can raise them to be sadistic.
So really, there's so many ways to find it just how the fuck do people think they're accomplishing something playing this game of raising or making human beings? Because isn't that right off the bat kind of a problem? You have to raise them to be predators, right? Because you certainly don't want them to be prey animals. and you have to make them so they are insensitive. You somehow have to make a big joke out of all the horror they're going to have to witness. You know, the cancer killing Grammy, you know, all the little nasty shit that you're going to have to make glib, superficial justifications for, and just make your kid into a sadist. I mean, fuck that.
To the next playing piece, you know, to keep rolling your little dice and playing the game until your number comes up. Okay.
Yeah, so it's first you have to watch horror, and then you have to experience horror. And that's the gift of life. I mean, come on. Gift? Silly wordplay.
Art, quit pretending there's some fallibility. All right, we've had thousands of years here.
So again, yes, this fallibility compared to what? Okay, first off, there's nobody else to fly the plane. And, you know, we really are standing on the shoulders of at least a hell of a lot of conscientious effort to pick at the world and find the truth. And so we have all of these facts. I mean, you know, just all the little, you know, even the little things. I mean, the one that stuck out in my head was the whole Galapagos Island thing. But this was something I found out sort of late. Okay, I mean, I was, you know, I wasn't 10. I might have heard it before then, but I didn't really think about it. You know, and the idea that there's this volcano essentially, you know, this fissure in the crust, and it just keeps popping out volcanoes or islands, and the islands drift on the plate, and so there's an old island and a younger one, then a younger one, then a younger one, then a younger one, and that's essentially what the Galapagos Islands are. It's just a little chain of islands that have been just, you know, make one, it moves, make one, it moves. And that concept is just, and it just so proves the antiquity of the planet in terms of recognizing how long things have been eking in existence, because obviously it takes so long to, you know, for the dirt and the dust and the crud to pile up on top of the rocks. So you start with this volcanic rock, and then you end up with a place, you know, full of a biosphere. And you can just, when you start to try to imagine how long that takes for the island to be colonized by all these dead bodies that have to essentially create the humus, you know, that'll be the soil, you know, and it takes, you know, 10,000 years per millimeter, kind of thing. No, it's just one of those proofs. It's just so obvious what we're really living on. This isn't something poofed by a god. This isn't, you know, this isn't any of the crap people think it is. And it's just these biological machines, and that's all they are, is machines. All right, and the machine's purpose is just to Xerox itself, you know, to make a copy for no reason, you know. It's just that what makes the genetics get into the future is laying eggs. You have to lay a genetic egg, a DNA egg, or the DNA doesn't go into the future. And that's the reason why it happens, is because it doesn't survive otherwise. Its durability isn't in creating a shield around itself. Its durability is in creating copies of itself. And once you have enough copies, they'll sort of be too thick with, you know, you make so many of you that they can't kill them all, and so one of them will survive.
1,000 years of human civilizations, well, let's even say 15 or 20.
Okay, yeah, so we really have good reason to think we have some competence, and we're not that distant from understanding. It's not that obscure. Now, obviously, what has happened over the last 30 years is science has tried to make it all back into a wooey, silly, goofball story of you know, nonsensical hobgoblins and pixies and muons and puons. I mean, it's just antimatter. I mean, all kinds of just insanely stupid concepts. Ugh.
Suffering as a result of antinatalism, right? My counter argument to that has been this is just assuming hypothetically that they were right.
Okay, so so we're arguing this stupid notion of whether to get to the end, we should create chaos and destruction of civilization, because that will facilitate nature taking over, which can't possibly be a rational end for somebody. I don't know how anybody rationally thinks the earth is better off run by animals. That's just too silly. So, it's such a fake premise, because, I mean, obviously these people who think nature, that nature's cruelty is somehow superior or so much more benign than our factory farms is just such an insipid. I can't, I don't even know how their brain bends the facts into that. How they can look at the attrition in nature and say, gee, that's just so much nicer than humans.
Acid, it's pretty bad. And obviously it's much worse long after. So if you survive.
All right, so we're talking about these ways to die and what's the worst and all this kind of crap, and it's just not much use into all of that stuff. But some things are only bad if you survive them. Like the initial getting stabbed might not be so bad. It's the later, when the pain shows up, that it's really bad. So there's lots of examples you can use to point out that it's about how long you suffer, and that a lot of that stuff. The good news is, I mean, if for there to be any good news, is that a lot of the injuries we experience, we won't feel as immediate pain.
You've spoken about an animal rights view. Now, of course, you're speaking about an animal rights view in the technical sense. Then you're speaking about a view that it's wrong to do to.
All right, so wait. So I'm just going to say, I mean, like on the second page of Benatar's book.
Right, so there's no point in Benatar trying to step away from, his obligation here to recognize that the animals are in the same trap that we're in, snap trap or whatever you want to call it. And it doesn't make any sense to have some strategy for humans to escape and no strategy for the animals to escape. It's just, if you can't, if it's all or nothing. If you can't end slavery, then there's no point in fighting slavery. I mean, that kind of thing. If it's, if you've got, the engine, the thing making it is what you've got to stop. If there's a hole in a dam, bailing water is not the strategy. Okay, the strategy is to find somebody to shove into the hole. Some fetus or something.
And so quantifying these things is going to be really difficult. I do think that humans inflict vast amounts of suffering, and not just in terms of quantity, but in terms of the intensity. If you think about the daily lives of farmed animals, it's a lot worse than the daily life of a wild animal.
So again, that goes both ways too. So, obviously a lot of wild animals are subjected to diseases and starvation, and they have to, cross crocodile-infested streams, and, lots of predation out there for the wildies. And the constant fear and the constant having to be aware and all that crap, and at least some of the domestic animals, all right, have a routine, and their routine isn't too violent. All right, some. Lots of bad, really horrific examples. So I do go into that, the pigs and, the being kept in a dark, stinking pen for your whole existence, tied in, just tied down in a box, and, like you're in an iron lung. Not nice.
To ask you, and I think my listeners as well would absolutely love to ask you on this, because I don't know how involved you are with all the kind of drama and argumentation that
you sort of asked the big one. Okay, would you fix it if you could? No.
Yeah, that really was his answer. It's just really, woof. Miss, swing and a miss. Yeah.
Tons of carbon we're shoving into the frickin' goddamn atmosphere. Well, back into the biosphere. But I just mean regulating.
So I was just kind of dismissing any notion that biodiversity or this or that or all these little stupid things are all that essential, that we can, in fact, eradicate half the living things on Earth or 90% of the living things on Earth, and the new balance will be just as good as the old balance. And it's just, it's just a bunch of hypey bullshit that we need dart frogs or the planet will fly into the sun. No, the absence of dart frogs will not be tragic. It really won't be. All right, just so there's no misunderstanding, I'm not saying that us disrupting environments is a good thing. I just mean that it is physically possible to transition from a world with millions of species to a world with 56 species. It's not impossible to do that and rebalance the system by just adding a little salt or adding a little something. We can evolve it into what it needs to be. Continuing.
If you're ill or damaged, and if you don't maintain that standard, then
Right, so the whole point of the predator thing is that it gets rid of a whole bunch of genetic defects. So it really does create the survival of the fittest, the challenge. And if you get rid of the challenge, then you're going to dilute the genetic capacity of things to be rewarded and punished, so to speak, survival and death. And you're going to melt the thing that was making the distinct difference from something that was incapable of being weak, in a weak condition where a predator would take advantage. And so the idea is things evolve immunities and strengths because the predators keep the pressure on and stop you from being able to reproduce if you have any defects. And so there's a certain role that predators have in keeping populations from dying of all kinds of other shit, because it makes it zero tolerance for defect. So it creates a genetic, it heightens the genetic standard for who gets to reproduce, because you're just not going to be allowed to if you catch a cold. And so you have to be immune to the cold, or you're going to get consumed by the predation. All right. And decisively consumed. Again, not in a little way. Harmed.
It doesn't really happen. And sometimes it's unjustified not to be intervening, and sometimes it's justified not to be intervening. There's a lot of repression going on in various countries around the world. Russia,
and so what do? Do you allow chaos, or do you do your best to figure out whether there's a necessity to fix something? So we've intervened in lots of places because it was unacceptably horrible. And the we part doesn't matter whether you convert it all the way into a you part. There's the little war of you with the civilization, and the bigger war with your civilization against other civilizations, and and all of them have to be decisive, and that's just your obligation. You either will or will not. And if you understand that the will not part is always the no answer, it's still answering the question. Saying I don't want to is the same as saying I won't, or something like that. I mean, there's no different. You're making a decision even when you're saying, I won't make a decision. That's a decision. I mean, saying I won't make a decision to step forward, to take one step forward, is the same as saying I won't take one step forward. Those two things are exactly the same. So sometimes when you're walking on the fence is clearly on one side of the territory, and you just can't evade that. So pretending that you're leaving the decision to some better thing is just pretty stupid. As an argument, it's really weak.
Is it enough?
Oh, now I'm trying to figure out whether it's enough of a video. That was funny. Ask my brain, is it enough of a video? Is this enough of a video? You have to make a decision. What do you mean I have to make a decision? I don't want to make a decision. I'm not ready to make a decision. Leave me alone. I'm tired. That's a decision. Don't you understand? You whining about you being tired and I can't do it. It's the same thing as saying I won't make a decision, which is the same thing as saying I won't do the thing you need to do. Oh, you're going to apply philosophical standards to me? To me? So my brain is now not happy. All right, anyway. So I'll make the decision that this is enough of a video. But it doesn't matter. Because when I often make a decision, actually pressing the button is complicated sometimes. Like, where the fuck is it? How do I press it? What do I do? Oh, that's right. I have to move the mouse. Oh, okay. And I have to move it over to this button over here, and I have to press it. Okay, so I'll do that. And then it'll be the end of the video. So I will make a decision that, yes, I've said enough. And, you know, there'll always be another video, right? Unless, of course, something horrible happens to me. Oh, God. Jesus. It's just so dismal. I mean, to have to live, you know, with those swords above your head. You know, this whole getting old thing. I just don't know how anybody could be for it. I don't know how any old person does any kind of bullshit about how great the golden years are. They look awful pointy to me. No, not good. Anyway, till the next time and such, and so forth and whatnot. Yeah. God, I hate it here. But you know, somebody's gonna do it, so I guess I'll just try to do it. You know. It would be better if you had a better pilot, but I'm the only one around. Okay, see, I didn't press the button I was supposed to, and I didn't. So there's always something that can get in the way of your agenda, your best efforts to do the right thing. Something gets in the way. Anyway, till